Hi, good morning. My name is Sara EHESS, and I'm a PhD student at EHESS. And the presentation today I'm giving is entitled Pacification as a New Strategy in the War on Drugs, Some Notes of an Ethnography of the Military Police in Rio de Janeiro. So before I start, I just want to thank real quickly the organizers of this colloque for having the flexibility to have my presentation, for accepting my presentation today, even though I'm in Brazil. So real quickly, I'm going to start. The structure of this presentation, real briefly, the introduction is going to explain what is exactly the Pacifying Police Unit, for those who don't know what it is. The second is going to introduce my fieldwork and how I engaged in an ethnography with the OPP station, in an OPP station. The third section is actually going to discuss how exactly the Pacifying Police Unit, even though changed the discourse, engaged in a new form of war on drugs. And then I'm going to conclude real quickly with just a brief remarks on what has happened in the last months in Rio de Janeiro, in the dimension of public security. So the Pacifying Police Unit, or UPP, is actually a section of the military police in Rio de Janeiro. So police in Brazil is state-led, so it's very specific to the city, and it is based on community or proximity policing strategies. Even though there's a difference between those two, I'm not going to get into that, but it is based on the idea of having a permanent presence of the police in communities that were under drug trafficking control. And it was, the idea came also with bringing police, but also having certain social programs. So it had a very innovative standpoint in that area. And then they were created. The first UPP station was inaugurated in a community called Santa Marta in December 2008. So it was created in a context of clear internationalization of the city. Already the city was known to be the host of the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016. So there was a massive investment in favelas, not only public security, but also in infrastructure and urbanization. So it was really a boom of the city. As you can see in this picture that signals where the station is in the community, you can see that it is related with social projects and also with a international audience, Programa Rio 2016. So this is a really general introduction of what is exactly the Pacifying Police Unit. So as I imagine you already know, the military police in Rio de Janeiro is a very big repressive force in the city. It is known for its violence and also its lethality. So this is kind of the background of the UPP. And also police usually have engaged with favela residents in cyclical ways. So there has been an intermittent presence of the military police in favelas with a strategy that's called invasões, which is the police enters the favela and looks for drugs or weapons or suspects. So this is very kind of illustrative form of the war on drugs, this cyclical invasões. And in contrast, the UPP, when it was created, it states that it is created for maintenance of public order in poor communities. And the decree that regulates it then define it as a philosophy of proximity policing that was established in order to consolidate state control in communities that are under ostensive armed criminals and return peace and public tranquility to local residents. So drug trafficking and drugs in general are not a goal for the Pacifying Police Unit. Um, the creator of the UPPs has mentioned numerous times that drug trafficking is impossible to stop, and the goal of the UPP was never to fight drugs. It was created to protect lives inside the favelas, and it was created to take away the armed traffic. Uh, but it never mentioned the drugs. So this is uh, kind of the scope of the UPP. And just to give a few words about my particular fieldwork, I did an ethnography of a station that was located in the south, the south area of Rio de Janeiro, which is the most wealthy part, the most touristic part. I chose a small community, and the station had about 150 military police, men and women, even though the vast majority were men. And I carried my field work between May 2014 until June 2015. So it was about 13-month ethnography that ended rather abruptly because the situation was pretty tense, and my presence there was quite problematic for soldiers and obviously for myself. So I had a quick withdrawal from the field. But what I basically did was to follow the daily life of the station through observations of patrols, which could be foot patrols or vehicle patrols, and life inside the station. And I engaged in informal conversations mainly, and I did have some formal interviews. So I collected the profile of about 46 sergeants and soldiers. And I followed the three main areas of the police work, which is visibilidade, where police stay in one point, a strategic point. Then there's the grupamento de policiamento de proximidade, which is a troop that knows specifically that their role is to engage with residents in a friendly way, with patrols that are relaxed. And there's the grupamento táctico de policiamento de proximidades, the GTPP, which are in charge of really repressing traffic. And so my observations are mainly based on this last group. It's important to mention. So the way these soldiers engage with the audience, their public, even though, as I mentioned, there's a triad that the UPP wants to dismantle, which is territory, armed traffic, and weaponry. They engage with this audience that they always will find suspicious. But within this mutual suspicion between the police and residents, I sort of identified two different types of soldiers. The first type of soldiers really tries to discriminate between those who he considers suspects and objects of police action, and those who he doesn't consider that should be object of police action. So really engages in a sort of filter and tries to identify. And he usually does this through discriminatory practices. And obviously this is based on big stereotypes. The biggest stereotype, and this is obviously not reduced to the super face, and this is well known, is the young, the black, the male, and the black. Which in the case of Brazil is ironic because military policemen also follow these lines of age and race. and gender. So, but this distinction is largely based on three categories, which there's the bandido, which is the trafficker. Then there's the vagabundo, for them this consumer, and the worker, the trabalhador, which is seen as a good person, persona do bem, and which is not related to trafficking. And the distinction between the bandido and the vagabundo is that while the trafficker is seen as the worst category, and I argue that he's even considered as non-human, the vagabundo, the consumer, even though he's not directly related to traffic, he sustains the drug economy. So he's also tormented by police action. And also one important element that I thought police engage with is the fact that if there's a precedent. And being a proximity police, police get to know the residents and get to kind of map out their public. And when there's a precedent, for example, a young man that engages in some sort of misunderstanding or a small confrontation with police will always be known to the police as a suspect. And he will be harassed, he will be quite an object of police action. And I often heard the expression when going to patrols with troops of, I know him, I know her, and this would be a reason to protect or to repress. And then the second category, I'm not going to talk about it much, but I just want to say that those generalize favela residents as equally suspicious. So these type of soldiers or sergeants would engage in overtly aggressive behavior. So basically the UPP, on one hand, it seeks legitimacy, and on the other, it produces delegitimization. On one hand, as I mentioned before with social projects, police, UPP, they make a great effort to gain the trust of residents. They engage in social events as party, Christmas party, Easter, all sorts of children's parties, and classes, language, music, or sports. And they also seek legitimacy through the proximity policing strategies. As I mentioned briefly, the JPP, which really try to engage with residents. And on the other hand, they produce this delegitimization, trying to look for fear, not respect. And this is mostly the workings of the JPP. On one hand, targeting what they would consider a suspect. As I mentioned, it could be just a young man that engaged in some sort of small confusion or small confrontation. He would be targeted forever as a suspect, and he would be harassed. So this sort of behavior delegitimizes police action. Most of these encounters have a degree of violence, even if we're not talking about extreme acts of physical violence, for example. There are sorts of other forms of aggression. So discrimination and aggressive PMs, which are the military police soldiers, are really part of this dynamic of pacifying police. And what I argue also is that this repression and protection is largely based on moral behavior. What I mean about moral behavior is that soldiers judge the deserving residents from those who don't deserve protection or repression. For example, based on, I mentioned the category of the worker, the trabalhador. He has a moral value because he engages with society through honest way, for instance. Another example of moral behavior could be, for instance, that soldiers who during the day, during the period where children should be at school, if there would be children who are in the public space in the favelas, soldiers would automatically think they are associated to the traffic because they're not studying. So this kind of moral behavior shapes how police engage in the everyday life of the community and of individuals. Um, in whichever category. I talked about the young male black, but there's also, for example, children that can be, well, usually they're considered as not a threat. If in some cases they are labeled as overt threats. So these are just quickly two examples. And the picture of the two children riding a motorcycle, I took it at a police event, and this was a Christmas party. And you can see that the soldier is engaging with the children, trying to lure them into the experience of the police. And on the bottom picture, which is this is a routine patrol of the UPP. I didn't took this picture, did this from a newspaper, but you could see that the tone of the two different actions of the UPP at the same time legitimizes, and if police engage in more violent actions, legitimizes the police in the residents' view. So real quickly, the conclusion, I think it is important to note that the UPP was a project that tried to distance itself from the war on drugs, but it really promoted a different form of combating the drug economy in favelas. And these policing strategies actually reinforce the social place of individuals in society. I mentioned three kind of broad categories that police distinguish among residents, which is the traficante, or the trafficker, the vagabundo, which could be the consumer, and the trabalhador, which would not be associated to traffic. And then quickly, I want to mention the playboy, which is the middle class young man who enters the favela. And even though police might suspect that he's engaging in illegal activities, this person is untouchable for the police. And while the police has very clearly that he's able to arrest a favela resident, he's very fearful of engaging with the playboy, which is the middle class man. So there's an interesting distinction based on socioeconomic and geographical location that police have very clearly in their way of operating. And basically, in the last few months, has been more strongly, but this has come since 2016, the decline of the UPP program. And actually the policies shifted completely. Now the army is taking care of the public security of the city. So we have seen a complete shift on the approach and the policies that are in place. And basically this war on drugs is a war on certain territories that are guarded with such clear aspirations of containing favela residents. So, well, I want to thank everybody. I went through very quickly through many elements, so if you have any doubts or questions, you can, we could try to discuss even at a distance about many of these elements. I want to respect the time, so I'm going to stop here and just there's my timer. So thank you so much.